You've definitely heard of the concept of an iceberg list, or a list where the items on the list range from the least to the most obscure. Today, I will be going over an iceberg about one of my favorite genres of movie, the coming-of-age movie. Now, this isn't a comprehensive list by any means. There are way too many coming-of-age movies to do that, but instead, it's a list where I have tried to compile several coming-of-age movies that are interesting for one reason or another. I've decided to stay away from like generic boilerplate films, no matter how obscure or how unobscure they are. This also is not a list of my favorite coming-of-age movies. Some of the movies on the list I don't even particularly like, but I have included them here still because I think they are important to mention. A lot of these films are adult in nature, although not all of them are. Some of them are appropriate for kids, but I just wanted to let that be known. And also, there might be some light spoilers on this list, but I don't think anything that would ruin the movie, but still, discretion is advised if you care. So without further ado, let's start at the top. These films are all very well received and are well known amongst almost everyone. Basically, anyone you ask, just a random stranger on the street, if they haven't been living under a rock for the past 20 or so years, has heard of these movies. Starting off with Stand By Me, released in 1986. This is one of my favorites, and it's a classic for a reason. It follows a group of young boys in the 50s who go on a journey to try and find the body of a missing boy. On the journey, they learn more about life and themselves, and by the end, they gather a valuable lesson about life. It's based on a Stephen King short story, and while it's depressing and has a lot of sensitive content, it touches on a lot of important themes. That's why it's so beloved by all ages, young and old, because I think it has a timeless quality despite taking place in a very specific era. Napoleon Dynamite is a really quirky coming-of-age indie comedy directed by Jared Hess that slowly has immersed a large cult following over time, so much so that it's now a staple of mainstream coming-of-age cinema. It follows the socially awkward title character, Napoleon, and his very dysfunctional family and social life. We see his many misadventures he has with his friends and his family, somehow created the perfect storm of being both extremely relatable and intoxicatingly random and quirky. It also creates an interesting blend of different fashion and cultural trends from many different time periods that all come together in such a way where the film feels both dated and timeless at the same time. It blends facets of 90s, 80s, 2000s culture. It's a very interesting world that this film occupies, and I feel like that's also a reason of why this movie's had such an undeniable cultural stranglehold on society. It paved the way for so many other unconventional coming-of-age movies that would come after it. And it's also kind of a landmark film in the indie film sphere, because it's gained such a cult following over time, much more than really any other indie film. Breakfast Club is undeniably a product of its time. It's a John Hughes movie, and extremely similar in tone and style to almost every other John Hughes movie, and John Hughes copycat movies, which ran rampant in the 80s. However, this movie was one of the first of its kind that does what it tried to do more successfully than most movies that have followed it. 5 different kids from all different walks of life, learning to become friends and open up to each other despite their differences, eventually realizing that they actually have a lot in common. It's an important story that many other films have since borrowed from this movie. No matter what you add to jazz up the story, this movie will always be the blueprint coming-of-age movie for a film of this nature. It's very 80s, and couldn't exist the way it does in any other time period. It's definitely really dated. But it's still an incredibly influential movie whose presence can still be felt and seen in cinema today. This is the only time I'm going to do this in this video, but I'm going to lump these next two together, because I don't really have a lot to say about them. These two films are both examples of the 2000s coming-of-age movie formula, but they're some of the best examples of this type of coming-of-age movie. They follow the generic and quite frankly overused plot structure that was so present at the time, but they also include some extremely important messages that don't shy away from showcasing these sensitive themes. Juno shows themes of teen pregnancy, and Perks of Being a Wallflower touches on themes of domestic abuse, child abuse, and mental illness. Both movies are very sensitive and accurate portrayals of the subject matter being portrayed, and are good watches for any teenager going through a similar experience. Dazed and Confused is a movie by Richard Linklater, who I've made an entire video about. You can check that out here. If you want to learn more about it, watch that video. It seeks to show what it was like to be a teen in that era, not caring about what the future may bring, but instead living in the moment. It also shows adults who were never able to grow up and still maintain the teenage mindset. It really showcases all different kinds and ages of teenagers and allows us to get into their mindset. It's a really great movie about growing up and coping with the fact childhood won't last forever. It's also just a really fun teen movie that can be enjoyed even if you aren't looking for some kind of deeper artistic merit. It really appealed to all different crowds, which is why it was so successful. This tier is filled with movies that you probably heard of. They're not obscure by any stretch of the imagination, but they aren't nearly as widely beloved as the entries in the first tier. Most coming-of-age movies you could think of off the top of your head probably fit into this category. Not obscure, but not super mainstream where everyone has seen them and knows about them. All of these movies that I put in this tier are ones that I think are worth mentioning. Boyhood's an interesting case because I don't think it's the content that makes the movie stand out. It's honestly a very generic movie. It's a super basic coming-of-age movie about a boy growing up from age 7 to 19. There's nothing particularly remarkable that happens in this movie that makes it stand out from the rest. His life is just a normal, basic boy's life. However, it was filmed in a super interesting way, which is why it's so well known and why it stands out from the crowd so much. It was filmed in a manner where each year in the child's life was filmed year by year over the course of 12 years from 2001 to 2013. Style went on to garner it mass success, like a lot of nominations at the Academy Awards. Moonrise Kingdom is a Wes Anderson film from 2012. It feels like a Wes Anderson movie and incorporates his very unique and whimsical style. It follows a young boy and a young girl falling in love and running away with each other. It does touch on many sensitive themes like child sexuality and mental health, but does so in a less grounded and more lighthearted way than something like Perks of Being a Wallflower does. It definitely still takes its themes seriously and has an important message to tell, but has a lot of fun telling it. But it still views the world from a more stylized, childlike perspective, and there are a lot of scenes of surrealism, of course. But the story it tells still manages to ring true today, despite all of these strange and whimsical elements that are incorporated. Almost Famous, telling a story about a teenage boy touring with a rock band in the 1970s in order to write a story that will hopefully get him published in the Rolling Stone magazine. It's based on writer-director Cameron Crowe's own experience as a young journalist and shows both the fun and dangerous side of a rock and roll lifestyle and what that can do to developing minds. It touches on themes of substance abuse, sexual abuse, betrayal, and the effects of fame. It's a really interesting and seemingly accurate portrayal of this lifestyle that really shows how harmful and predatory the world of rock and roll and the entertainment industry as a whole can be to younger people, despite not being a very successful movie upon first release. It's since become a huge cult hit, like giant, and it's extremely well regarded among critics and audiences alike today. 8th Grade is an extremely accurate depiction of what it's like to grow up during the digital age. It may have a very standard and rather traditional story structure, but it captures what it's truly like to be a middle schooler during this very specific moment in time that no other film can do accurately. None of the dialogue feels cringy. No more cringy than a middle schooler normally is. It's one of the most truly authentic films about growing up that feels accurate to every child's experience today. Definitely worth a watch if you are or are about to be in the 8th grade, or even if you're in high school. Lady Bird follows a teen in California in her last year of high school, in 2002, as she has to decide what she plans to do with her life as an adult. The movie follows her as she tries to find somewhere where she belongs in this world, as it begins to seem like the whole universe is collapsing around her. We see her complicated relationship with her mother, her closeted gay boyfriend, and her friends. It's a very heartfelt, if basic, coming-of-age story that is relatable to everyone trying to figure out what they want to do in this life. Hunt for the Wilder People is a 2016 comedy film made by Taika Waititi, following a young New Zealand boy named Rookie in the foster care system. After his foster mom dies, he runs into the New Zealand wilderness with his dog to avoid being taken by Child Protective Services, or the New Zealand equivalent of Child Protective Services. After a series of unfortunate events and misunderstandings, Ricky and his foster dad are forced to run from the law after a warrant is put out for their capture. The two bond and become extremely close as they flee from the authorities. Although it's an unconventional coming-of-age story, it's still a very heartfelt one. That's a great watch for anyone interested. Directed by modern realism filmmaker Sean Baker, who I've mentioned my admiration for in the past, The Florida Project is a coming-of-age movie following a very young girl named Mooney and her adventures around a budget Orlando motel where she lives. This movie is extremely dedicated to showing the everyday struggles faced by impoverished people in the area. We understand the very unpleasant and dangerous situation that Mooney lives in, but Mooney herself does not. This is the only life she knows, and to her it's normal. It's devastating to see her mom, Haley, try to provide a normal life for her daughter despite the situation that they are in. When things take a turn for the worse, she's forced to subject herself to less than savory acts in order to make money. Despite the movie showing you a very upsetting series of events, it's not intended to shock or appall you, unlike some later movies on the list do, but instead it only intends to show you what real life is like for the millions of unseen people in major urban American areas living below the poverty line. The movie is intentionally upsetting and depressing, but it's no more upsetting than the real life that many people find themselves in. This movie does not make a spectacle out of these people, but instead tells us to open our eyes to them and see the truth that hides beneath the surface. The next movies are not as well known by the masses, but if you're into film and participate in film circles, you've probably heard of these movies. You might not have seen them because they're not mainstream movies, but they're not super obscure either. But if you're not really into movies at all, you might not have heard of these. Ghost World is a 2001 comedy movie based on a series of comic books by Daniel Clowes. It follows two close friends, played by Thora Birch and Scarlett Johansson, as they decide to manipulate and troll a middle-aged man, played by Steve Buscemi. But as the film goes on, Enid, played by Thora Birch, begins to relate to the lonely man and becomes very close with him. This relationship is at first beneficial from both parties, but as it goes on, it starts to go south, resulting in both of their lives being much worse than when they met. It's really interesting and unconventional coming-of-age story that has all the same themes you'd expect from a movie of this nature, but approaches them with a really satirical tone. The main character's life does not change or become better, and she doesn't have some kind of new outlook on the world by the end of the film. She's just as much of an outcast as she always was, if not more so now. It's both a coming-of-age film and a black comedy parody of what we expect a coming-of-age movie to be. American Graffiti is a movie from 1973 directed by George Lucas. Yes, that George Lucas. It's another coming-of-age movie that takes place in the past, this time in the 60s, following several high school graduates having to decide what to do now that they are adults. We see all of these kids on their last day of summer in their small California town as they're forced to figure out what they plan to do with their lives. The movie is a very interesting exploration of the limbo period between childhood and adulthood that everyone has to face at some point in their lives. Raw is the only coming-of-age horror movie on this list, and it's directed by Julia ducournau, who made my favorite film of 2021, Taika. This movie is like that film in the way that it's a body horror with very graphic imagery. Also like that movie, it's really heartfelt as well. It's about discovering who you are and being forced to confront the things that you've been trying to hide from yourself. In this case, the fact that you're a cannibal. There's no cure for the things that make us what we are, so it's best to come to terms with that and learn to control it instead of suppressing it. The themes explored in this movie may be rather tired themes that have been thoroughly explored thousands of times before, but they've never been explored in this way. It's the twist that really gives those themes the punch that they have in this movie. That's what makes them interesting. However, it's not for the squeamish. If you're not really into horror movies, this really isn't for you at all. The 400 Blows is a classic coming-of-age movie directed by French New Wave director François Truffaut. It follows a young, misunderstood, and troubled boy trying to navigate the confusing world around him while everything is seemingly against him. It may be an older film, but it's a very influential one. It's definitely one of the defining movies of the French New Wave movement, and is an early example of a coming-of-age film. Many elements present in this film would go on to inspire countless other works. But I'm a Cheerleader is a 1999 teen coming-of-age comedy about a teen girl who's sent to a convergent therapy camp after her parents assume her to be a homosexual. You may think that it's a standard teen comedy in the vein of American Pie, and while it has similar elements, its story is way deeper, more heartfelt, and just more interesting. It has a very important message about acceptance and being yourself. It portrays two women falling in love, but doesn't do so in a raunchy fashion that's meant to appeal to the male gaze. It definitely is a comedy, and it's a funny one at that. It's trying to make you laugh, but it's not trying to make you laugh at these people. It's trying to make you laugh with them and understand their struggles and what they're going through a more comedic lens. It's a very good LGBTQ plus comedy that I feel deserves far more love and credit than it gets. Kids is a very dark, gritty, and exploitative story about several teenagers in New York City running around, having sex, doing drugs, and getting into other unsavory situations. One of the main kids, Telly, constantly persuades and manipulates young teens and preteens to have sex with him and, unknowingly to him, exposes them to HIV. One of his victims, Jenny, spends the movie trying to tell him that he has the disease before he can spread it to another unsuspecting girl. The movie is another example of extreme realism, trying to show the real disturbing world of teenagers that parents don't know about. To me, it feels like it's trying way too hard to disturb, and it gets to the point where it just ruins the experience. It doesn't feel real or natural. It feels like it's a movie that's shoving this situation in your face. It doesn't really care about showing the real situation about these characters, as opposed to just making you feel gross. I do admit that it pushed the boundaries for what can be shown and explored on film, and did lead to other later works of realism that I think do work a lot better. Mysterious Skin is a 2004 film directed by acclaimed indie film director Greg Araki. This film is an incredibly intimate look at past traumas and how different people cope with the same experience. The film doesn't shy away from showing the sensitive content it's referring to. In fact, it shows it directly to the camera. The movie doesn't do so in an exploitative manner, though. It only does this in order to enhance the incredibly intimate feeling of the story. It's an incredibly natural and raw movie that shows you how the past never truly leaves you. The things that will happen to you will always stick with you, so you learn to cope with them. Some create fantasies in order to help them forget or shield themselves from the truth, and others romanticize that experience to make it shape how they live their lives, trying to paint it as something different than it was. However, by the end of the movie, they're forced to face the truth. They have to tell themselves what really happened in order to overcome their trauma. It isn't elegant or grimy, it's just real. It's in your face, but not in a manner intended to shock. All it wants to do is show you what happened and what is happening. No matter how utterly disgusting and disturbing what happened truly is, Y Tu Mama Tambien is a Mexican drama directed by Alfonso Cuarón, following two horny young boys who invite an older married woman to run away with them. They're unserious about the offer, they don't expect anything to come of it, but to their surprise, she accepts after her husband cheats on her. The journey is initially fueled by all of their sexual frustrations, but as it goes on, the relationship between the three grows incredibly close. Through each other, the boys learn more about themselves and allow themselves to experience things they never would have before. By the end of the movie, we learn that the two have since turned apart, but the things they have experienced will forever change them. As for the woman Louisa, although she was helping these boys to learn more about the world and themselves through sexual experiences, she's not merely a concept. Now that she finally has freed herself from her husband, she has nothing else to lose. She's doing as much as she can in the little time she has left, and that means opening herself up to new experiences. It's a coming-of-age story with a very standard coming-of-age plot structure, but it's viewed through a lens that accurately portrays the sexual frustrations of young teenagers in a way that isn't super exploitative. Unlike some other films on this list. Kids. Kids! But instead feels very natural and truthful. Casual movie fans and people who aren't really into movies have definitely not really heard of these. Unless you're really into these type of movies, you've probably not heard of these. Welcome to the Dollhouse is a 1995 movie directed by Todd Solondz, who is known for making dark comedy movies with very disturbing subject matter. This film follows Dawn Wiener, a character who would go on to feature in later films from the same director. She is a middle schooler who's relentlessly bullied at both home and school. Throughout the movie, life does not get easier for her. Even at the end, she's still picked on and made fun of by her classmates. The movie is a subversion of one's expectations of a coming-of-age film. Instead of the main character finding her place in the world and being accepted by a group of friends, her situation remains dire throughout. She never finds her place in middle school and is just as ousted by society by the end of the movie. No matter what she does to try and be more liked, she'll always come up empty-handed. The movie shows a much more hopeless, mean-spirited perspective on the genre that many other movies are too afraid to show. Middle school sucks. Sometimes it gets better, but most of the time it does not. And you can't do anything about it. Picnic at Hanging Rock is an Australian mystery coming-of-age movie following the disappearance of a group of schoolgirls in 1900 and the effects that it has on the community at large. It shows growing up through the eyes of a tragic event, not how it affects the girls involved, but also the other people in the town after the fallout of the event. It's an extremely devastating film, and a landmark one that would go on to inspire later films in the genre. This movie is a really weird one. Daisies is a Czech New Wave surrealist movie following two teenage girls as they try and defy the pre-established societal rules that people are expected to stick to. It's a rather dreamlike film that shows what it's like to grow up and rebel against the rules. Throughout the movie, these two girls do things that constantly subvert the status quo and flip the stereotypical ideas of femininity and growing up on their heads. It's a really non-literal exploration of growing up, and definitely is not for everyone, but it still shows an important part of becoming an adult, even if it does it in a strange way. Many people, when they grow up, they rebel against the pre-established rules that people are expected to follow to try and prove something. And that's what this shows, even if it shows it in a very weird and abstract way. The movie Boy is about a boy in the 1980s. He and his siblings are raised by his grandmother and have a really absent father. That is until his father comes home in search of money, and while there, tries to have at least a bit of a presence in his son's life. More like he pretends to have a bit of a presence in his son's life. The boy, at first, grows close to his dad, or feels like he's getting closer to his dad, and he's infatuated by the cool lifestyle he leads. But soon he discovers that his dad's really not there for him at all. About trying to fit in and be accepted by the people you admire, like your father, and eventually realizing that they might not actually care about you. And that if people don't care about you, then you don't need to be accepted by them. Not everybody is going to like you and care about you. Some people are incredibly selfish and are only there for their own personal gain. The real allies you have in this world are the ones that are always there for you and don't just show up when they need something from you, like money. Kes follows a young British misfit living in the 1960s, forming a very close relationship with a kestrel, a bird, after the rest of the world seems to turn against him. He becomes incredibly skilled in the world of falconry after training it to fly, and the movie shows us an unlikely relationship between the two. It's a really emotional and by the end heartbreaking story. These two need each other more than anything else in the world. It shows how friends can be found in the most unlikely of places, and how easily they can end. River's Edge might have similar qualities to a teen coming-of-age comedy from the 80s on the surface, but once you actually watch it, you realize it's not that at all. Despite being from the same era, it's much more disturbing. It's about a tight group of friends who are ripped apart after a brutal crime is committed by one of them. The friends have to decide what they plan to do after the incident. Some take sides of the person that committed the crime, and some move as far away from the incident as possible. The movie is a really unsettling portrayal of how far someone will go for their friend, even if they commit one of the worst things you can possibly do. It feels like they know each other, and they have for ages. It also shows really interesting dynamics, not just between friends, but also between brothers, and how they can go a little bit too far with their arguments and squabbles sometimes. It's a really compelling outlook on the difference between killing someone with remorse and without remorse, and how some people are more deserved of forgiveness than others are. It's a really intelligent and underrated coming-of-age movie that has a lot deeper messages than most other movies of its kind. Kristen F. is a German film about substance abuse in teenagers and the destructive attitudes that substance abuse can lead to. It also showcases how gateway drugs can eventually lead into hardcore substances, by showing the title character's journey from using psychedelics to eventually becoming addicted to heroin after she's constantly pressured into using it by a boyfriend and doing anything to get more of it. It showcases concepts about how hard it is to escape from drug addiction, especially when everyone around you deems it as acceptable. These movies are ones that are very obscure. General audiences, even if they are movie lovers, probably have not seen these. Nonetheless, I think that more people should be aware of these movies because they are really good. Leah Forever is a Swedish film about a 16-year-old girl named Leah who lives in Eastern Europe. After her mother surrenders custody of her to go live in America with her new boyfriend, she's forced to fend for herself and live in poverty. The only person she's able to find solace in is her good friend, Volodya. Although soon, she meets a man named Andre, who she quickly falls in love with. He tells her that she's going to come with him to Sweden, or she'll be able to get a job with him and live a comfortable life. However, once she gets there, she realizes Andre was really just playing on her vulnerabilities and her longing for a real relationship in order to take advantage of her. The movie is such a realistic portrayal of the dangerous world that young, impoverished women have to face on a daily basis. People who are easy to manipulate and don't have anyone who is going to look after them once they're gone are easy to take advantage of and kidnap. Leah Forever is an incredibly depressing and gut-wrenching, but realistic depiction of the world of human trafficking. It doesn't show some Hollywood portrayal, it shows us a story that's representative of almost all the people in human trafficking circles today. Abductions aren't random, and they stem out of months or years of slowly building a codependent relationship with the victim until they're unable to resist. The targets of these abductions are usually not middle-class white women, but are instead very impoverished people who don't really have a place in the world where they feel welcome. Leah in this movie is just one example of that person. Ratcatcher is an art house indie drama film from 1999 directed by Lynne Ramsay. James and his family live in a low-class government housing development that is soon to be demolished after all of its tenants get rehoused. We follow James and his life around the poorer parts of the city where the filthiness is amplified due to the garbage strike, causing hundreds of trash bags to pile up in the streets and alleyways, attracting thousands of rats. We see him interact with his friends and also try to come to terms with the guilt he has after the death of his close friend, which he was in a way involved in. Ratcatcher is a very intelligent and intimate look at growing up while being surrounded with death and poverty at every turn. Even once the trash is all cleaned up and the rats are gone, the bleak world around James still remains. This is a world that he will likely have to live in for the rest of his life. My Life as a Dog is a Swedish film about a young boy who has a very close connection to his dog. However, that dog has to be sent away to the pound once he goes to live with his faraway relatives after his mother gets very ill. And the boy has to cope with his new surroundings away from his mother, brother, and dog. It's a very emotional story about learning to cope with your entire life changing, and how especially damaging that can be when you're a child. Change is never easy, especially when that change is something as drastic as the loss of everything you once loved. Vagabond is a French movie that begins with the death of a young woman. Throughout the film, we learn of the struggles and hardships this woman, who lives a nomad lifestyle, had to face. We see her many adventures and misadventures, and how she grows and changes over the course of the movie. Watching this film is a very close and intimate experience, and you really begin to feel a connection with the character, and you start to understand her. To the rest of the world, she's nothing but a mere wanderer. When she does die, no one cares or bats an eye, and the few people that did get the chance to know her never knew she died at all. Real Women Have Curves is a coming-of-age movie about the generational differences between a mother and daughter. Throughout the film, Anna and her mother Carmen have differing opinions on what Anna should do in her life. Anna wants to go to college and embrace who she is, but her mother is more old-fashioned and thinks she should work at the factory in town with her sister and try to pursue a more traditional feminine role in society as a wife and mother. Anna has to both navigate what she wants to do and who she wants to be, while dealing with her overbearing mother and home life in general. It may be overt with its messaging at times, but it's still a very truthful representation of what it's like to try to meet the demanding expectations of society while figuring yourself out. It's also a very accurate depiction of generational differences between a parent and child. That Girl is a French coming-of-age film about teen sexuality and finding the right person. The main character in this movie believes that the whole idea of virginity being sacred or something you should save for true love is stupid, and is over the whole idea of true love. Throughout the film, she watches her sister fall head over heels for a man who really doesn't care about her at all. It's a story about love and a budding teenage sexuality, trying to figure out and understand the complicated and confusing world of intimate relationships. Some people are so eager to be loved that they confuse being wanted sexually as the same thing. She understands more than her sister does about love and people's true intentions due to the fact that she's been watching people express affection for her sister for years. She understands what people really see in her sister, when she doesn't. It's a very interesting and unique look at promiscuity of teenagers, and the unhealthy idea of relationships that we've been fed isn't something to really chase after. This layer is the obscurest of the obscure. Films that no one has really heard of or seen. Super unknown features that deserve to be talked about more than they are. There are most likely more obscure coming-of-age movies than these. These aren't the most obscure of all time, but they're the few I know of and the ones that I think need to be talked about. If you know of any that I didn't put on here, or forgot to put on here, or anything like that, please let me know in the comment section below. But without further ado, let's take a look at some very, very obscure movies. George Washington is a movie about kids growing up in poverty in a small South Carolina town. It follows a shy boy named George Richardson, and throughout the movie, George and his friends pass the time in this empty, dilapidated town. The movie has a really interesting cast of characters and builds them in a natural and unique way. This very strange and almost surreal town feels lived in a way that many other movies just don't with their locations. By the end of the film, tragedy strikes the community in the town, and we see how the people of the community, especially the kids growing up in it, cope with this tragedy and how it affects the rest of their lives. Deep End is a coming-of-age psychological drama about a teen boy who forms a very unhealthy relationship with his female co-worker. The movie is about teenage boys and their sexual frustrations and just how far they can go to try to fulfill these desires. No matter what obstacles that come in Mike's way, he never lets down and continues his infatuation up until the very unhappy ending. This movie may be exaggerated for entertainment or suspense's sake, but it is an important movie to watch because it does showcase these feelings that young boys have, and when taken to the extremes, how damaging they can be. Growing up comes with a lot of new feelings to the world around you. Some are able to cope with these feelings, while others, like the boy in this movie, can't. Mars One is a Brazilian coming-of-age movie about a lower-class family who experiences a series of misfortunes due to several disagreements between these family members. The two children have their own plans for what they want to do in life. The daughter plans to move in with her girlfriend, but experiences a series of pushbacks from her traditional homophobic parents. The parents also do not understand or approve of their son's plans to become an astrophysicist and shoot down his wishes to go to a lecture put on by Neil deGrasse Tyson. Instead, his father wants him to try out for a professional child soccer league, despite the fact that the boy has no interest in soccer at all. These parents are pushing their ideals of what their kids should be in their eyes on them, and that leads to several disagreements and misunderstandings. And because of these arguments between the family members, their lives slowly begin to fall apart as the conflicts reach a head. All of these things are seen through a lens of poverty and a longing to break free from the confines of poverty. The Most Beautiful Boy in the World is a Swedish movie that offers a look at the effects of child stardom on a very young and developing brain. It shows how hard it is to have the entire world watching you all at once, especially at such a young age when you're still trying to figure yourself out and don't even know what you want to present to your friends and family, let alone the entire world. The movie is about a child actor who became an international icon after he appeared in the starring role of 1971's Death in Venice. The movie follows his entire life and how it dramatically changed after he was unanimously crowned the most beautiful boy in the world by millions worldwide. It's such a fascinating and heartbreaking look at the world of child acting and the horrors that come with it. Kidulthood is a British film about growing up in a gang and the harsh life that it brings with it. We're shown the lives of many misunderstood youths and the unsavory things they get up to in their free time. It is kind of exaggerated and a bit over the top, but it does still show you and bring light to an issue that is definitely a very important one, I would say. It's a very interesting look at the unsavory lives of those who many don't really think about most of the time. Little Fugitive is the oldest movie on this list, being from 1953, but it's still a very important one. It's a movie that continues to ring true today in many ways. It follows a day in the life of a young boy living in a lower middle class neighborhood of New York City. After this young boy, Joey, is tricked into believing that he has committed a terrible crime against his brother, he runs away from home to Coney Island. This is a very early but important example of realistically portraying the lives of impoverished children, and very young ones at that. It's a very low budget affair, but it manages to explore the concepts that it's putting out there in an interesting way by showing the struggles of this boy in contrast with the whimsical land of Coney Island. It's an area seemingly perfect for boys like Joey. People go there to forget about their struggles and hardships of everyday life. Joey's doing the same, trying to escape his struggles for just one day before everything catches back up to him. Little does he know, everything that happened is just a sick prank. But that doesn't make the movie any less impactful. If you did like the video, like and subscribe, and hopefully you learned about a movie you haven't heard of before. And like I said, please leave recommendations for movies that you also like in the coming of age genre that you think more people should know about. I'm just one person, I don't know about every coming of age movie ever, and this isn't trying to be a definitive list. Goodbye, and I'll see you next time.